Joining us now with reaction is Fox News medical contributor Dr. Nicole Saphier and House Minority Whip Congressman Steve Scalise. Doctor, I will start with you. Her remarks struck me very much like the guy who was running for the Virginia governor. His remark about that you don't have any right as parents to know what your children are being taught. This disconnect, as though we're co-parenting with her. It's none of her business. What is your take on this notion that 2-year-olds, it's not a big deal to have them in masks for several hours a day?
Well, Tammy, first of all, Merry Christmas Eve to everyone out there. I do take offense to this in the sense that, I'm a mother of 3 children as well as a physician. And while I can tell you early on in the pandemic, when we did not have a lot of tools to decrease transmission and also protect the vulnerable, mask wearing had a much bigger impact and role in our fight against COVID-19. However, now that we have an arsenal between vaccines and boosters and treatments, and also that we have a wall of immunity between vaccine-induced immunity and natural immunity circulating through our community, we have been able to identify that children, specifically school-age children, are by far the lowest risk when it comes to a severe outcome of COVID-19. Now, I can tell you that while most children they don't have a lot of problems with wearing the single-layer cloth mask all day, but some kids do. Some kids actually get skin infections, some kids get gingivitis, and some kids are really struggling mentally and emotionally with continuous mask wearing. And the question is there a benefit to these single-layer cloth masks that the majority of children are wearing? And I can tell you that there is not one piece of scientific data at this point that singles out that there is a benefit to these cloth masks. And yes, there are a lot of studies that the CDC likes to point to showing when kids wear masks, there's less transmission. But there are a lot of confounding factors. And I can tell you, especially with Omicron, this is a highly transmissible variant. It is far likely that there's much more aerosolized particles, and so these little cloth masks are doing little, if nothing. And so at this point, we have identified that these children are the lowest risk. Those who have chronic medical conditions or have risks or live with someone who is immunocompromised, they have the ability to get vaccinated at this point. So it is time to remove the masks from our children.
Yeah, I have to tell you, Representative Scalise, that there's, this understanding now after 2 years that the way the government has responded has caused an end to sobriety for many people, alcoholism, drug abuse, suicides. And when we think of children, the ability to socialize and understand communication, body language, smiling at someone, being able to communicate in that way, that this damage, nobody seems to care. I don't know if you get a sense of that, but we don't hear that from the government, that there's any empathy for the negative effects of what their plans have been so far with COVID.
That's right, Tammy. And first, good to be with you, and Merry Christmas as well. And by the way, when President Biden says follow the science, there's tremendous scientific research that shows the damage being done to our young kids. First of all, that year that so many kids, millions of kids, were kept out of school, that did devastating damage. Many of those kids will never be able to make that time up. But then we saw depression. We saw suicides skyrocket among young children because they were not able to be around their friends. They were isolated. When they should have been in school, the science said the kids were better off in school instead of being at home playing with their friends, getting COVID anyway. They should have been learning in the classroom, and they're not learning at the same level when they're at home. So there's a lot of science that shows that. But this is one more example of President Biden using science where it benefits him and then ignoring science where he could be helping people, but it doesn't fit his narrative. He's had a vaccine-only strategy, and that's been at the detriment of millions of people who could be benefiting from so many other things. There's a lot of reports out that show that he massively dropped the ball with testing. Back in October, there was a plan presented to the White House that they turned down because they only wanted to talk about vaccines. And then you look at things like natural immunity, herd immunity. They won't even answer that question of what is herd immunity, even though scientifically we know that it's out there. This idea that some states are just shutting everything down again and some states are remaining open. And frankly, you look at states like Florida, Texas, that are open, following the science, protecting people. They have, in some of those states, they have lower outbreak rates. and they're keeping their citizens safe while not crushing families, crushing small businesses, and ultimately the depression and the drug overdoses that we're seeing because of the shutdowns.
You know, we hear that when, and it's expected, you can't know this until the election happens, but it looks right now that the Republicans will be in charge of the House and the Senate after this coming midterm in 22, and that revenge is on the list of things. I prefer to call it justice, including an investigation, perhaps, in the nature of what has transpired this previous year. Is that what you're hearing, and is that something you would support, is to investigate the nature of why someone like Anthony Fauci is behaving, I think, strangely in the midst of his commentary, the nature of the failures of the Biden administration? They've acknowledged they needed more tests even last year, and then they didn't do it. Is that something that's on the list for the Republicans to investigate?
Well, Tammy, when we win the majority back, and we're working very hard, we've got great candidates that are out there running to help us get the majority back. And you saw in Virginia and other states that wave of parents, people that are just fed up with this shutdown mentality. But ultimately, we need real oversight. I'll give you an example, Tammy. There has not been a single investigation into the origin of COVID in Congress. Many of us have been calling for Congress to have that kind of investigation when many medical experts on both sides of the aisle have said it probably started in the lab in Wuhan. And by the way, was not transferred from a bat to an animal to a human. It was probably a genetically modified virus.
Sir,
why shouldn't we be investigating that?
Yeah, we know clearly there's a lot we need to do. So you're confirming that, in fact, we're not just going to think that this last 2 years didn't happen, that we're actually going to look into conflicts of interest, all of that.
Oversight and accountability.
We need oversight and investigation.
Let's start getting that out there.
All right. And Dr. Nicole, Dr. Nicole, when we think about vaccines, which I think are important, but we also seem to have dropped the ball on therapeutics and treatments. Isn't it time that we shift our focus to things like the monoclonal antibodies, other treatments, other therapeutics to deal with people who now might get very sick from this virus?
Well, Tammy, the safest way to get to reach a level of herd immunity, the vaccines do place that foundation. They are the foundation of our immunity wall. But from that, you have your building blocks of your boosters as well as your natural immunity. But the glue that holds it together is also the treatments, because you will have breakthrough infections, you will have unvaccinated, and you will have people who get very sick. Now, I can tell you when it comes to the monoclonal antibodies with Omicron, the two most popular ones are not having any efficacy against Omicron, which is we've just gotten a bunch of alerts this past week that the hospitals are pulling these antibody therapies because they're not working at all. There is still one that is working and it is being instituted, but it is very low supply, so it is for the extremely high-risk individuals. Great news is the FDA gave the emergency use authorization for Pfizer's oral and outpatient medication Paxlovid yesterday.
Finally.
And just today, we just got the EUA for Merck's medication Molnupiravir, which in clinical trials does not prove as effective as Pfizer, but at this point, any treatment, anything that lessens the risk of hospitalization and death, that is a win. This is how we move forward. It's just like with influenza and the flu. You have a vaccine and you have Tamiflu, and now with COVID, we have a vaccine and we have oral outpatient medications. We need to get these out to people.
Part of what is interesting is that we really don't know if something's not going to work unless we try using it, unless we actually move into that arena and start treating people, because then we'll have another surprise. And maybe this time, if there's a variant or some other thing, the thing that's frightening, of course, is not necessarily COVID now, which we know well and that we seem to be prepared for, but the thing that we don't know about that will happen next. And this is, from what I've seen so far, we've got to respond very differently. So thank you both very much. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year as well. Thanks for being